Hi, I've just seen troubling footage of the BBC Scotland journalist James Cook getting harassed and abused outside a hustings event in Perth. This is a hustings event, of course, for the Conservative leadership contest. Um, Now, this is doing the rounds on social media, and there's a few videos of it. But basically, this journalist James Cook, um, he's trying to reason with these very angry demonstrators, and they're hurling all sorts of abuse at him. Traitor, scum, scumbag, all the names under the sun. Now, there's no physical abuse, but it's quite an intimidating scene, really. Have this group going up against really one man. I have to say, Cook showed incredible professionalism. He didn't lose his temper. He didn't shout at them or anything like that, but he did make the point that he was simply trying to show the scenes. And, these people that were yelling at him, if you see the footage, they didn't come across as particularly bright. Um, but yeah, it's an unpleasant thing to see when a journalist is just trying to do his job and he gets this sort of abuse. Now, let me make a few caveats here. People have a right to peacefully protest. So, nationalists who don't like the Tories, they can peacefully protest. If they don't like the BBC, they can peacefully protest. The problem is when you're hurling that sort of language at someone, it's not peaceful. It's not, even if there's a lack of physical violence. And apparently there was egg throwing and so on, another part of the hustings. I don't know if that's true or not, but um, I could very well believe that that would have happened because there is enough evidence now of the ugly, ugly side of Scottish nationalism. Now, of course, Nicola Sturgeon and Ian Blackford and other senior SNP figures have condemned it, um, calling it disgraceful. But that's only what they should do. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's the First Minister, so she has to be responsible. It may even be that she does genuinely find it distasteful, that sort of behaviour. Maybe she's embarrassed by it. But the SNP and Nationals can't say this is just fringe behaviour. I've seen people trying to claim, oh, the BBC's edited this and the majority of people were fine. Um, I saw one guy post a pathetic 12-second video, which didn't really prove anything. It showed some people with assault tires and they were, well, it didn't really show anything. It didn't show anything to the contrary, actually. But aside from the ugly abuse itself, there's actually something deeper going on here. And it's been going on for years in Scotland. I'd say at least since the referendum in 2014. um, this very, very intolerant mentality from Scottish nationalists. Now, when they're accused of Anglophobia, they bristle at that and they say, oh, but we have English supporters. Maybe they have a few English supporters. But what I would say to them is just because you personally don't hate the English doesn't mean you can deny that there's a problem in your midst. It's like any movement. If there's a problem, it has to be dealt with. And it's just nonsensical and disingenuous to say that this is just a fringe issue. It's not just anti-English sentiments; it's obviously anti-UK sentiments. But this turning on fellow Scots, Scots who aren't enthusiastically waving the saltire, Scots who believe in the United Kingdom, who voted for Better Together in 2014, are now being treated as outsiders, as traitors. Go back to England. This is the sort of comments I'm saying. Go to any Scottish Nationalist forum. If you think I'm exaggerating, you'll see this sort of language is rife. The BBC is enemy number one because it's the British Broadcasting Corporation. The irony, of course, with that is you ask many Tory supporters in England, they'll say the BBC is very biased against them. So, in a sense, the BBC can't win. I mean, I'm not necessarily defending the BBC, and there is areas to criticise it on. But in this case, it's simply a journalist doing his job. Now, no journalist should have to go through that sort of abuse. Um, it's disgraceful. And you can imagine if that's the abuse a journalist gets, you can imagine what an MP would get. I'd imagine they would need security to go out of this event. Now, I don't particularly like the Tories. I don't agree with all their positions and their policies. I think it's legitimate for people to voice anger and protest peacefully. But as soon as you start threatening people, doesn't matter who the person is, whether they're an ordinary person, a journalist, or a politician, as soon as you start threatening them, you lose the argument. It's like when a bunch of nationalists and leftists attacked Farage in Edinburgh. That was ugly behaviour. And again, Nigel Farage is far from my favourite person in the world. But it's stupid because all you do is you don't draw attention to your cause. Okay, maybe infantile people who think, oh, great, you've egged them, or whatever it was. I think it was a milkshake in that case. But to the civilized majority, it's ugly behaviour that has no place in a democracy. Of course, nationalists don't respect democracy. They've never accepted the results of the 2014 referendum. But in a sense, although I don't think any of this is good, they're shooting themselves in the foot because the more they behave like this, the more they expose themselves, and they show that another referendum is. It would basically be a case of submitting to bullies if another referendum is allowed. Um, that once in a generation referendum. A generation isn't 8 years or 9 years or 10 years. A generation is at least 16 to 18 years, i.e., the length of time it takes for someone to come of age. In other words, the generation, so a Scot born in 2014, when they become a young man or a young woman, they can look back and think, well, are we better together or not? And they can make their own decision. But that's a generation. Um, and I just feel sad. I don't even feel that much anger. I almost sympathize with them because, they have so much hate and so much bitterness. Um, and unfortunately, I think it's getting worse. But like I said, it's been going on for years. And I'm not going to say the union side is perfect, but the vast majority of abuse I have seen, honestly, hand on heart, has been from the nationalists. I haven't seen SNP offices getting vandalised. I haven't seen Scottish flags getting torn down or burned. It's been entirely directed at anything that is deemed to be British or Unionist. That's honestly my perception. Of course, if Unionists are engaging in vandalism or abuse or threatening behaviour, I condemn it. But I honestly haven't seen that much of it. Not certainly not by comparison. During the referendum, Labour MPs were getting a torrent of abuse. Um, and it's very ugly. This is the face of Scottish nationalism. So Sturgeon and Blackford they can be the politicians. They can put on a diplomatic front. Some people might also be tempted to draw false equivalencies because of Liz Truss's recent comments, where she was quite rude about Nicola Sturgeon. Now, I think that was a mistake. I think it plays into nationalist hands. And it was. It was rude. It was undiplomatic. I think Truss was wrong to say that. But there's a difference between insulting one rival politician versus being anti-Scots. And what people forget in that statement that Truss made was she said she grew up in Paisley. So that wasn't an attack on Scotland, it was an attack on Nicola Sturgeon. I think she shouldn't have done it in retrospect because it played into nationalist hands and it looked arrogant. She shouldn't have done that. Um, Labour and even other Tories were criticising her for it. But it's in no way comparable to what's going on in Scottish nationalist circles. I mean, what they're doing is they're creating a very intolerant environment where any Scot who is deemed to not be Scottish enough, they're not patriotic enough for Scotland, they're deemed as traitors. And they have the arrogance and audacity to say that it's the UK that's racist. Now, this may not be racist, but it's definitely bigoted and it's definitely intolerant. And I fear it is on the rise in Scotland. This is happening on Sturgeon's watch. So sure, she can condemn it, but I think her constant mantra about another referendum isn't helping matters. She should get on with the business of governing Scotland. Looking at things people care about, crime, education, health. By the way, a lot of those are devolved matters. So scapegoating Westminster for that is a cop out. Um, but I'm even seeing people try to condone this. Oh well, the biased BBC deserved it. You don't have to like the BBC, but to say that they're stooges of the Tory party is ridiculous. Ask any conservative, and they'll probably say the BBC's biased against them. The BBC can't win. It's a damn disgrace, and it just saddens me. That is why I really, really hope that unionists can take back control, because I think the longer a nationalist administration stays in power, it doesn't matter if Sturgeon and so on condemn this behaviour. It just, every time she calls for independence, I think it galvanizes this. Apparently, the head of Indie Ref 2 has called for people to be responsible, but these senior politicians are, I think they've lost control on the extreme fringes of nationalism. I mean, I'll make this final point. Look at something at UKIP. Of course, there's going to be outliers. Of course, not every Scottish nationalist is an anti-English bigot. I'm not saying that, but I am saying it's a big problem within the movement, and I don't think it's just a few people. Um, so, by the same token, I think there are UKIPers with racist views, um, but of course, there'll be outliers. Um, Scottish nationalism has a problem. And you just have to look at any forum to see its ugly side coming out. This is not an optimistic, positive picture. This is a very sectarian, internalized, anti British, anti English narrative that they're coming out with. It's very sad to see.